we're diving into something I think a lot of people can relate to. And it's this idea that, like, you can understand English fairly well, like when you're reading, when you're listening, maybe even writing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actually speaking, it's like hitting this wall.
Totally. It's like you've got all this passive knowledge.
Right.
But actually, like, making your mouth form the words and stringing them together, it's like a whole other skill.
It really is. So, like, that's exactly what we're going to try to unpack today based on all this material you've sent. It's like, what is that invisible wall? How do we get through it?
Yeah, and what's interesting is, like, a lot of the sources you sent actually point to this idea that it's not really about, like, a lack of knowledge. It's often more about, like, psychological barriers.
Right, yeah.
And, like, adopting the right practice.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that then. Like, what are some of the big reasons that we kind of freeze up when it's time to speak English?
Well, I think, like, a huge one is just fear of making mistakes.
No.
Like worrying about grammar pronunciation, just wanting to be perfect.
Yeah.
And then that prevents you from even trying.
Yeah, I think, too, like, the vocabulary piece, I think, is huge, too.
Totally.
It's like, I don't have the right words to express what I'm thinking.
Yeah. It's like, you know what you want to say.
Yes.
But then trying to find the English words and, like, having them come out quickly. It's
like catching smoke?
Exactly.
Yeah. Or like sand.
Yeah. And then that kind of leads to overthinking. Like, the sources talk a lot about this urge to translate in your head before you speak.
Yeah.
And that just slows you down. It makes your speech hesitant.
Right.
You're not really in the flow.
And then I guess, too, like, a lot of people just don't have enough practice.
Absolutely.
Right?
Like, they don't have enough opportunities to actually speak.
In real life, yeah.
Which is crucial.
Yeah. But I think one thing that I found really encouraging from the material is that, like, it doesn't have to be this, like, perfect English.
Exactly.
It's more about the confidence.
And the practice.
Yeah.
Than, like, being perfect.
Fluency over perfection.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that actually leads us to this next point then of, like, shifting our mindset.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Because the way you think about speaking English is actually really important.
Absolutely.
So what are some of those, like, key mindset shifts that can help?
The first one might seem obvious, but it's, like, really important to accept that, like, mistakes are just part of learning any language.
But even native speakers.
Oh, totally. Native speakers make mistakes all the time.
All the time.
It's part of being human. It's part of, like, the learning process. And I think it's helpful to think of mistakes as, like, data points.
Oh, interesting.
Like, they're showing you where you can improve.
Okay, so it's not a failure. It's feedback.
Exactly.
So that takes the pressure off.
Totally. And kind of related to that, the sources really stress this idea of, like, focusing on communication more than grammar.
So, like, getting your message across is the goal. If you can communicate effectively, that's a win.
Okay.
Don't worry so much about, like, getting the preposition perfect or, whatever it might be.
Okay.
And then building on that is this idea of, like, embracing the discomfort of speaking.
Okay.
It's natural to feel awkward or nervous when you're pushing yourself, but that feeling of discomfort is often a sign that you're growing.
Okay, so being uncomfortable is actually a good sign.
It can be, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, like, the more you step outside your comfort zone, the more that zone expands.
Okay, I like that.
And then there was this kind of interesting technique in the materials about talking to yourself in English.
I was going to say that one kind of stood out to me. I was like, huh? Is that really helpful?
Well, I think it can be because it's totally risk-free.
Yeah.
No one's judging you.
Right.
You can practice forming sentences, experimenting with vocabulary, just getting comfortable with the sound of your own voice. Like, you could narrate what you're doing, describe your plans for the day.
Like, have an imaginary conversation with yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so it's like a good kind of low-pressure way to start.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what about, like, once we start shifting our mindset, what are some, like, practical things we can do every day?
Yeah, so one thing that came up a lot is recording yourself speaking.
Okay.
So you could pick a topic, maybe what you had for breakfast, talk for a couple minutes, and then listen back.
Okay.
It can feel a little strange at first.
Yeah.
But it's a really good way to identify areas for improvement.
So it's like getting an objective view of your speaking habits.
Exactly.
That's cool.
And then another thing is finding speaking partners.
Okay.
There's so many online communities and language exchange apps now where you can connect with other learners. Maybe they're at a similar level as you, or even native speakers who are learning your language.
Oh, that's cool.
And they want to practice.
Okay, so like finding someone to actually talk to.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be a real person. There's AI and chat bots now.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, like ChatGPT, Elsa Speak Cambly.
Mm-hmm.
These can give you a chance to practice in a really low-pressure environment.
Right.
So you can ask questions, get feedback on your grammar, pronunciation.
So it doesn't feel so scary.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And then another simple but really effective thing is to just like consciously describe your surroundings in English.
Okay.
So like if you're at home, on your commute, whatever, just try to articulate what you're seeing, hearing, feeling in English.
So even if you're just by yourself, just start thinking in English.
Totally, yeah.
And like actually verbalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. So it seems like even like short bursts of practice
Absolutely
are really helpful.
Yeah, like 5 to 10 minutes a day can make a big difference.
So it's like building that habit.
Consistency is key.
Okay. Consistency is key. I like that.
Yep.
So I guess another thing that comes up a lot is vocabulary.
Totally.
Like feeling like you don't have enough words. So what are some good strategies for building vocabulary for speaking?
So one thing is to learn new words in the context of like phrases and sentences.
Okay.
Rather than just isolated words from a list.
So like seeing how the word is actually used.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then another thing is using spaced repetition systems.
Okay.
Like you can find these in apps like Anki or Quizlet.
Mm-hmm.
And these will show you new words and then like prompt you to review them at increasing intervals.
So it's like reinforcing it over time.
Yeah, it's based on how our brains work.
Cool.
And then the sources also really recommend like learning from real English conversations.
Okay.
So that could be like TV shows, podcasts, dialogues from movies, and just paying attention not just to the words, but like how they're used together.
Okay.
In natural speech.
So it's not just about memorizing a word.
Right.
It's about understanding how to actually use it.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe most importantly is to actually use new words.
Okay.
As soon as possible.
Don't just like understand it.
Yeah, don't just passively understand it.
But actually use it.
Yeah, try to incorporate it into your conversations. Even if it's just with yourself.
Right.
It's that use it or lose it principle.
It really is. Yeah. Okay, so what about pronunciation?
Yeah.
So let's say you have the vocabulary, you're feeling a little bit more confident, but then you're like, my pronunciation is not great.
Totally.
What are some good strategies for that?
So one classic technique is the listen and repeat method.
Okay.
So you can find examples of native speakers, maybe in films, YouTube videos, podcasts, and just try to mimic their pronunciation.
So like paying attention to the intonation?
Yeah, intonation, rhythm, how they form the sounds.
Okay.
And then there are also some great apps specifically for pronunciation practice, like Elsa Speak and Forvo.
I've heard of those.
Yeah.
Cool.
And those can give you feedback on your pronunciation of specific sounds and words.
So it's more targeted?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
And then another technique is shadowing. So this involves listening to a sentence or a short passage and trying to repeat it simultaneously with a speaker.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you're mimicking their speed, intonation, pauses as closely as you can.
Interesting.
And then finally, the sources recommend like specifically targeting sounds that are difficult for speakers of other languages.
Yeah.
Like the threeth sound.
Yeah.
Or the different R sounds.
Right, because there's a lot of those in English.
There are.
Okay, cool. So it's like really being intentional with your practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what about this idea of like thinking in English?
Oh, yes.
Because I know a lot of people get stuck in that translation loop.
Absolutely.
So how do we actually start to think in English?
So one thing is to start labeling everyday objects around you in English.
Okay.
So instead of thinking the word in your native language, immediately think of the English word.
Oh, so like if I see a lamp, don't think of it in my native language, think lamp.
Exactly, lamp. And then another thing is to try to form your thoughts and your internal monologues directly in English.
So like even just talking to yourself in your head.
Yeah.
Try to do it in English.
Exactly. And even if it's just simple sentences at first, just make that conscious effort to think in English.
Okay, so it's like training your brain to think in a new way.
Yeah, it's like rewiring your brain a little bit.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah. And then the sources also recommend using English to English dictionaries.
Oh, interesting.
So this forces you to think about the meaning within an English context.
Right.
Rather than immediately jumping to a translation.
Okay.
And then, of course, like the more you can immerse yourself in English content, the better.
So like reading, listening, watching.
Everything as much as possible.
Exactly. The more you surround yourself with the language, the more naturally you'll start to think in it.
So like even if you're not living in an English-speaking country, you can kind of create that environment.
Exactly. For yourself. Okay, so let's say we've built up some confidence, we've got some vocabulary.
Yeah.
How do we actually like navigate conversations?
Yeah, so the sources had some good tips about starting and maintaining conversations.
Okay.
So first of all, like simple conversation openers are key.
Okay.
You know, things like, hi, how are you doing today? Or that's an interesting, whatever you notice.
Yeah.
And then asking open-ended questions is also really important.
Okay, so not just yes or no questions.
Yeah, exactly.
So questions that invite more of a response.
Exactly. And the sources also suggest like preparing and practicing some common conversational responses.
Oh, okay.
So, think about typical situations you might encounter and have some go-to phrases ready.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. And then also, like, don't underestimate the power of filler words.
Okay.
Things like, well, actually.
Yeah, I think those sometimes get a bad rap.
They do.
But they're actually really natural.
They are. They're totally natural, and they give you a little bit of time to think.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, without those awkward silences.
Okay, so it's like a little buffer.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So we've covered mindset, daily practice, vocabulary building, pronunciation thinking in English, navigating conversations.
Right.
What about staying motivated?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a big one, too.
It is, yeah.
Like, how do we keep going?
So again, like consistency is so important. Incorporate daily English listening into your routine.
So like podcasts, audiobooks.
Yeah, podcasts, audiobooks, music, whatever you enjoy. And then make a point of reading something in English every day.
Okay.
Whether it's news articles, blog posts, social media updates.
Correct.
And then it can be really helpful to set small goals.
Okay.
Like maybe aim to have one short English conversation each week.
Oh, I like that because then it feels achievable.
Exactly.
Right.
And most importantly, like celebrate every milestone.
Oh, yeah.
No matter how small.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, it's easy to get discouraged.
Yeah.
If you only focus on how far you have to go. But it's really important to acknowledge how far you've come.
I love that. Okay, so as we're kind of wrapping up this deep dive, what is the like core message?
I think the big takeaway is that fluency in spoken English is not about perfection.
Right.
It's about consistent effort. It's about having a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And embracing the whole learning process.
Which includes making mistakes.
It includes mistakes.
Yeah, I like that. So as we finish up here, we want to leave you with this question.
Yes.
What is the biggest hurdle you face when it comes to speaking English? And what's one small step that you can take today to address it?
Yeah.
I love that because all of this information is great, but it's really about like, what's the next step?
Yeah, what's that one thing you can do to move forward?
Exactly.
So yeah, we hope this deep dive has given you some ideas.
Some good strategies.
Some inspiration.
To take action.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.